За анхаарлаа хандуулж хамтагаа үзэгч та бүхэндээ баярлалаа. Хөтөлбөр зочны ярилцлагын цагаар үргэлжилж байна. За өнөөдөр бид студидтэй Нэгдсэн улсын байгууллагын Хүн амын сангийн Аз номхон талын бүсийн захирал Пио Смитийг студидтэй урьлаа. За зочныгаа бид бас Монголд ирсэн зорилго болоод Нэгдсэн улсын байгууллагын Хүн амын сангийн Монгол дахь үйл ажиллагааны талаар болоод бусад сэдвээр ярилцахаар студидтэй урьсан юм. За ингээд зочдоо бас үзэгчтэйгээ танилцуулах боломжийг олгоё. Ингээд хүрэлцэн ирсэн танд баярлалаа.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be in Mongolia and looking forward to our discussion.
Okay. За өнгөрсөн хэд хоногт таны хувьд бас ингээ Монгол улсад нэлээд баггүй ажиллаа. За тэр дундаа Өмнөг аймагт зорчилсан байгаа. За мөн одоо дэлхийн эмэгтэйчүүдийн чуулга уулзалт өнгөрсөн хэд хоногудад бас Монгол улсад боллоо. Тэгээ та бас Монгол улсад юу яагаад ирэх болоо, ирэх болсон зорилгоосоо та манай үзэгчдэд бас мэдээлэхгүй юу?
Well, you know, it's fantastic to be in Mongolia and to have spent the week with a lot of leaders, a lot of women leaders, and also a lot of local leaders. And that's really what my visit has been about. I wanted to see firsthand what are some of the challenges that women and girls in Mongolia are facing, and how is it that we can better address those needs. I spent some days down in Mongolia province, and really inspired by the local leaders and the local officials that I met, the health service facilities that are there in place, really to make sure that we're providing adequate care, particularly for maternal health. And here in Ulaanbaatar, I've also been attending the World Women's Forum under the auspices of the President. And really there, you know, I had an opportunity to showcase the important work that needs to be done to ensure that we have comprehensive sexuality education for all young people. Because when we do that, then we're able to ensure we have gender equality, but also gender equity and healthy relationships. And it's been a very positive week so far for us to strengthen our partnerships with many different actors, both national and international, and also to reaffirm some of those important commitments that we have as a United Nations.
За таны хувьд бас одоо Нэгдсэн улсны байгууллагын Хүн амын сангийн Монгол дахь үйл ажиллагааны талаар та бас манай үзэгчдэд мэдээлэхгүй юу? За энэ талаар бас үзэгчд манаас нэлээд сонирхож байгаа гэж бодож байна.
UNFPA has been in Mongolia for several decades, and actually, you know, Mongolia has been a fantastic friend to the United Nations, and so we feel very privileged as UNFPA to be able to partner with the government and other actors to take forward our work. At UNFPA, we have three main objectives. The first is to end preventable maternal death. The second is around ensuring that everybody has access to family planning. And our third objective is to end the scourge of gender-based violence. So I focused on that this week in terms of learning about some of the great work that we've been doing in Mongolia. So if you take, for example, maternal health, down in Mongolia province, I was able to visit some of the health facilities there that are providing that sustained support for rural communities. And the progress is real. You know, in the last 20 years here in Mongolia, you've been able to achieve a decrease of maternal mortality from around 158 back in 2000 per year, 158 deaths that could have been prevented, to now, last year the number was at 46. That's a huge achievement. And if you go even further down, in Mongolia province that I visited, in the last 5 years, they've had no maternal deaths that could have been prevented. That is a sign that, you know, when you have integrated, sustained investments by all partners, you get the results and you save lives. The other thing we work on, of course, is on gender-based violence. Here in Mongolia, 1 in 2 women will face some form of violence in their lifetime. Actually, 1 in 3 women in Mongolia will suffer physical or violent abuse, often at the hands of an intimate partner. And this is a scourge that we are working really hard to both prevent, but also to help provide response services for. We work with the government to have what we call one-stop service centres throughout the country. I had the privilege and the honour to visit one of those centres where I could meet with the staff who are extremely dedicated, 24 hours, 7 days a week, providing a whole range of services to these women who very often are at their most vulnerable point. They've been beaten up. They're often coming to these centres with only the clothes that they have on their back, sometimes with their children as well, who have witnessed this abuse or sometimes been suffered it also. And when they come to these centres, it's a place of refuge. It's somewhere where we can help provide shelter, but we're also providing counselling, we're providing medical services. Importantly, we're also providing legal advice, because these women and girls, they deserve justice, and we have to work with our partners in the legal and police sector to ensure that justice is served. And then very importantly, this is about dignity. This is about also making sure that we help these women who have suffered terrible traumatic event. How do we provide a pathway for them back into the community and give them that confidence again to have a life that is fulfilling despite the trauma that they've gone through. And then, if you allow me, the final thing that we're really proud of working on here in Mongolia is the engagement with our youth. Youth, as you know, are the key for the future, but they're also the key for the present in terms of how we engage with each other as a society. And so we work across the country with our youth development centres, with the private sector actually. These kids at the youth centre, they are learning life skills, but they're also learning how to have mature conversations, often about intimate or things, issues that can be sometimes a little embarrassing for young people to discuss. So we're really encouraging positive masculinity, but also healthy relationships. And that's also having a very important impact here in the country, because in the last 10 years, we've almost halved the adolescent teen pregnancy rate. When you have young teenage girls who aren't becoming pregnant, the life choices that they have are enormous compared to what happens if they become pregnant unintendedly during their teenage years. And so that's all about ensuring that they have economic independence, but also that they're able to live a life where they are in charge of the decisions over their body.
За таны бас эхний ерөөд асуултаа бас уйлдуулж асуумаар байна л да. Улаанбаатар хотод одоо зохион байгуулагдсан дэлхийн эмэгтэйчүүдийн чуулга уулзалтанд дэлхийн олон орны удирдагчид эмэгтэйчүүд оролцсон. Ер нь бол салбар хуралдаанаараа ингээд маш олон сэдвүүрэнд ялангуяа хүүд эмэгтэйчүүдийн тулгамдж байгаа маш олон асуудлыг ерөөд бас хөндөж ярилцсан байгаа. Тэгэхээр ер нь яг дэлхийн охид эмэгтэйчүүдийн тулгамдж байгаа олон асуудал, сорилт бэрхшээлүүд бол байна. Энэ бүхнийг одоо шийдэхэд бидэнд ямар гаргалгаа байна гэдгийг бас нэлээд хөндөж ярилцлаа. Тэгээ таны хувьд одоо шинэ нэгдсэн үндэсний байгууллагын хүн амын сангийн бас нутаг хариуцсан захирлын хувьд энэ уулзалтын талаар бас ямар бодолтой байна вэ? Ямар онцлог үр дүн байна гэж бас таны хувьд харж байна?
You know, gatherings like the World Women's Forum are extremely important. They're important firstly because we need to take the temperature on, where progress is at, but also where are the bottlenecks. But it's also, this has been a long fight for gender equality and for gender equity. And so it's very important that we have that solidarity for leaders from all sectors and at all levels. And the first thing I would say is that this World Women's Forum in Mongolia this week has been extremely important in terms of reaffirming that global commitment to gender equality. 30 years ago at the World Women's International Conference in Beijing, we have the famous slogan that women's rights are human rights. Well, coming here to Mongolia this week is about reaffirming that yes, women's rights are human rights, but it takes leadership and it takes investment and it takes a lot of effort from a lot of different partners to realize that promise. Now that promise is not just about, women and girls in urban centres or, who would have an opportunity to enjoy economic and education opportunities. It's very much about reaching those furthest left behind. So what do I mean by that? That's very often women in rural settings or here in Mongolia, nomadic settings, but it's also about women and girls with disabilities, women and girls from ethnic or indigenous groups. These are the women and girls in our societies across the world who most need us. And if we don't reach them first, then we can never realise that promise of ensuring gender equality, human rights for everyone. So that's the other takeaway that we have from Mongolia this week, which is we cannot leave anyone behind, any community behind. What has also been very encouraging, there's been a lot of work and advocacy over the years around showcasing the dangers of climate change and the need for governments, but all of society to take very concrete actions to help mitigate and prepare for the climate-induced crises that we're seeing across the world. what we heard this week in Mongolia was a firm commitment that all of these responses to the climate crisis, they have to be gender sensitive. And when I say gender sensitive, that means that you need women as part of the governance of any climate solutions. When women are involved, then you see solutions that are tailored to the needs, the unique needs of women and girls, particularly in those left behind communities. And then the other thing that is, of course, very much looking to the future, at the World Women Forum, we heard a lot about, bridging that gender digital divide. Technology is an amazing development, an amazing tool for all of society. To fully enjoy it, we have to make sure that technology is equitable. And when I say equitable, that means that women and girls have to be involved in the design processes of technology. It means that they have to have access to technology as young teenagers. They can use that platform online to amplify their voices, to showcase their activism, break down gender stereotypes. But also, there's a dangerous part to this. We're very concerned about the rise in technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And that has a very sinister dimension to it, whereby women and girls are being targeted, particularly those who want to go into the public policy space, like our young politicians. But also, it's a dangerous world for that young teenager sitting in his or her bedroom, where you can be predatorized, where you can have your image distorted and sexualized. And so these issues around technology-facilitated gender-based violence, it's a very new and emerging issue that needs urgent attention by all governments. But it also requires that we are there to help those survivors of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, because very often they're suffering traumatic incidents of abuse at the hands of people who are, hard to identify in many instances. So that commitment to ending gender-based violence in all its forms was also a key message coming out from the World Women Forum today.
Залуу охид эмэгтэйчүүдийн асуудал. За тэр дундаа энэ уур амьсгалын өөрчлөлт охид эмэгтэйчүүдэд бас тодорхой хэмжээнд нөлөө үзүүлж байгааг бас ярьж байна. Тэгээ гендер асуудлыг бас нэлээд хүндэж ярьж байна. Тэгэхээр Монгол улсын хувьд бол яг ингээд тулгарч байгаа асуудал сорил төвшөөлүүд их олон байдаг. Энэ дундаа бид одоо бас гендерийг тэгш бус байдал, за ялангуяа одоо энэ нөхөн үржихүй эрүүл мэндийн асуудлыг бас их тулгамдж байна гэж үздэг. Тэгэхээр ер нь бол яг таны бодлоор одоо Монгол улсын хувьд яг энэ гендерийн тэгш байдлыг хангах, эмэгтэйчүүдийн ер нь чадварыг бэхжүүлэхийн тулд яг таны ажигласнаар харснаар бидэнд одоо ямар саад бэрхшээл тулгарч байна гэж харж байна. Та бас түрүү яриандаа дурдлаа л да, ялангуяа гендерийн асуудлыг, за ер нь ялангуяа залуу охид эмэгтэйчүүдийн асуудлыг бас нэлээд хүндэж ярьж байна. Энэ дээр та бас нэг өрхөн болыг хуваалцахгүй юу?
Well, let's first start with the opportunities that exist here. You're very lucky in Mongolia because you have a lot of high-level political engagement and leadership around these issues, and that makes the difference. But also, in addition to that, what you have is a supportive legal framework. When you have a supportive legal framework, that drives change, that helps drive where the investments go. That solidifies that no matter who comes into the government, we hold dear to the principle that we want to protect women and girls from violence, that we want to have a life for our youth that is fulfilling, where everybody has equal access to education, employment opportunities. So that legal framework piece is really important. Here in Mongolia, you also have a lot of international partners and UN agencies. And of course, part of our job as that community is to work hand in hand with government to offer not only some of the expertise that we have on a lot of these issues, but also to showcase some of the international best practice that there is. I think whenever we all join hands to learn from each other, then we get a better result. And Mongolia has also been showcasing some of the excellent work it has been doing on the international stage. So it's a mutual learning exchange, I would say, that really also helps. Of course, like in many countries across the world, the main issue around achieving gender equality is that we don't have the financing. And when you don't have the financing, then words mean nothing. So having sustained financing that is across all sectors of a national development strategy is so key. But also, we've got to be strategic. We have to move from short-term budgeting to long-term financing, and that means that you get a better return on investment. So for every dollar you're spending, you're going to get 10 times and more back whenever you make sure that women and gender-related issues are, manifested in all the budget lines of a government. Then you get an equal set of lines of progress for all of society, where both men and women can all move forward together and thrive, and also feel that they are protected in their society.
За зохистой хөгжлийн чухал суурь нь бол залуучуудын чадварыг бэхжүүлэх байдаг. Тэгэхээр нэгдсэн улсын байгууллагын хүн амын сан ер нь Монгол залуучуудын чадварыг бэхжүүлэх чиглэлээр ямар санаачлаг гарган ажиллаж байна. За тэр дундаа бид нэр эрүүл мэнд, за эсвэл боловсролын асуудал, ажил эрхлэлт энэ тал дээр та усны мэдээлэл.
Well, here in Mongolia, we have conducted the first youth situation analysis, and we will release that report next month to government. And we're hoping that, that analysis, which of course is not just from what we see from the programs that we're engaged in, but is also about listening to young people and their needs and their realities, which is extremely important. We hope that that's going to help drive the necessary policy changes, the policy enhancements that are required. Across Mongolia, we have been working in mostly all of the provinces of Mongolia, and we have our youth development centres. Now, we're also very proud that we partner with the private sector, with the Unitel group, to have those digital hubs, those youth development centres. And they're so important in terms of youth development and youth engagement. These centres, I visited one down in Mongolia province. You have boys and girls who are coming together to not only learn about life skills, to engage in other interesting areas like robotics or electronics that perhaps they don't have the opportunity to do in formal education. But it's also an opportunity where boys and girls can engage in healthy discussions around sexuality, and have a mutual, learn what it is to have mutual respect, learn what it is we mean not only by gender equality, but gender equity, and how you live true to that in your daily life. And then the other thing that we do here in Mongolia is we have our youth health cabinets. These are all about ensuring that particularly young girls, but also young boys, that they have access to a range of sexual and reproductive health services that help them live healthy lives, informed lives, but also where they can be in a safe space to ask questions, to get the right kind of information that they need, so that they can make the kind of informed choices that will, provide for a fulfilling life moving forward for them.
За бүс нутаг болон дэлхийн хэмжээнд доктортой хөгжлийн зорилтууд хүрэхийн тулд ер нь Монгол улс ямар үүрэгтэй ер нь оролцох боломжтой вэ гэж харж байна. За ялангуяа бид гендерийн тэгш бус байдал, эмэгтэйчүүд эрхийг хамгаалах тал дээр ер нь Монгол улс ямар үүрэг оролцоотой байх вэ? Шууд өөрөө ярьж явчихлаа. You can go.
Well, Mongolia is making fantastic progress. I'm really heartened to hear about the recent election results, whereby we have 32 female members of parliament now making up the parliamentary total. That's fantastic progress. So you're at about 25% in terms of the overall numbers, which is just about 1% under the global average. These are all success stories that we need to grab, but also we need to move forward. 25% is still half of 50%. We need to get to 50% so that we have equal representation in our parliament. That's really important. But it's also about making sure that, particularly our female MPs, that they are given the space to lead in Parliament. That is really important also. It's not just about the numbers, it's also about that meaningful participation, but also having women in decision-making positions. That's what helps to make the difference. I think more broadly, what I would say here in Mongolia is, there is a need to mainstream gender equality, and mainstreaming means that it takes very deliberate leadership. It's a sustained program of engagement and investment, but ultimately it's about making that economic argument that when you mainstream gender equality practices and policies, then you have better outcomes across the board. I mentioned the area of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. This is not unique to Mongolia. And my message to the government of Mongolia, but equally it applies to my own government, Ireland, it applies to every government across the world. We really do need everyone to zone in on this threat to women and girls. Because, like I mentioned to you earlier, it's not just the abuse part that happens, it's also what is behind that. That's about holding women back in many instances. This technology-facilitated gender-based violence, it very often targets young women who want to have spaces in the public policy arena. And because they're being targeted and threatened, you see a less willingness to get involved because of that. That is an attempt to sustain what we've seen for centuries, which is dominance of male patriarchy that has held women back and actually held women down in many instances. We want to do away with that. We want to have a society that is equal, welcome and fulfilling for everybody.
За сүүлийн үед одоо энэ хүчирхийллийн асуудлыг бол нэлээд хөндөж ирж байна. Тэр дундаа техник технологи хөгжиж байгаа энэ үед технологид суурилсан энэ хүчирхийллээс магадгүй улс орон болгон ер нь иргэдийн хувьд яаж одоо бид нэр сэргийлэх ёстой юм бэ? Энэ тал дээр та бас нэг өөрийнхөө бодлыг хуваалцахгүй бидэнтэй.
The first thing is that we have to continue to draw attention to that issue. That means having conversations about it. And of course, government have a very unique responsibility, but also there are other important players that need to step up here. There is no regulatory framework yet that actually helps protect women and girls in the online space the way that it should. That's why at UNFPA we're liaising with some of the big tech companies in Silicon Valley like Google and Microsoft and many other willing partners to look at this very complex issue. Of course, there is the regulatory aspect to it, but it's also the willingness to put in place mechanisms that can help prevent some of these activities online. I spoke yesterday with one of your ministers here in Mongolia and spoke about the need for us to also provide support, particularly to young families. This is an emerging issue, like I said, and it can be very difficult to understand how do you preempt some of this. So what is it that you need to say to your young adolescent daughter or son that can make them fully aware of what exactly that threat looks like and what it is, what are the steps that they need to take to remove themselves from that threat. That means having very open, honest discussions within families, but also within the school setting, within our youth development centres and other locations like that, so that we are able to fully forearm our young people as to the threats here, but also to do it in a way that is based on realities. So let's not get caught up on culture and tradition when we're talking about some of these sensitive issues. Let's remember that at the bottom line of all of this is protecting that young girl from that online abuse. It's about making sure she doesn't suffer abuse such that she restricts herself from the type of job or opportunities that career that she wants to pursue. That's what has to drive us. And so anything else that gets in the way of that, we have to learn how to deal with those issues and get more partners in that open conversation. That's really important, and that's what's going to help address this very complex issue. But it does require that sustained leadership. It also requires the sustained funding to help the survivors of this, who suffer at the hands of this kind of technology facilitated gender-based violence. And I think the more that we're able to bring to light these issues, then the better the response is going to be.
Таны хувьд сая ярианыхаа ихэнд нэгэн улсын байгууллагын хүн амын сангийн Монгол дахь үйл ажиллагааны талаар бас мэдээлэл өглөө. Ер нь зүгээр Монгол дахь үйл ажиллагааны талаар таны хувьд цаашдын төсөөл ер нь ямар байна вэ? За магадгүй цаашд хэрэгжүүлэхээр төлөвлөсөн төсөл гэвэл юу байна вэ? Магадгүй төслийн үр дүн бас юу гэж харж байна вэ?
Well, like I said earlier, Mongolia is a great friend of the United Nations. It is also somebody who is leading in the United Nations space. My hope is that we continue to strengthen that partnership, broaden that partnership to make sure that all the different players from society, should it be business, academia, civil society, that they all feel welcome under the tent to discuss these issues, to fulfill their own roles, and that they also feel supported. That's really important here in Mongolia, but also as a model elsewhere. But ultimately, for UNFPA, we are very focused on the Global Sustainable Development Goals. 17 goals that talk about social progress, economic progress, human rights for everyone, looking after our environment. And what we are trying to do at UNFPA is to situate our specific focus around sexual and reproductive health, youth empowerment, ending gender-based violence, to situate that within all of the goals so that we get a very integrated response, and we get one that is fully financed and one that is fully responsive to the needs of women and girls. That's the duty that we have as the United Nations. We take it very serious, and it's only because we work hand in hand with government, with local leaders, with community leaders, faith-based leaders. It's only because of that partnership that we're able to make some of the gains that we see here in Mongolia. I'm very hopeful.
За бид тиймээс ярилцах цаг өндөрлөж байна. За өнөөдөр бид холоос ирсэн зочноос Монгол ирсэн зорилго болоод нэгэн улсын байгууллагын Монгол дахь үйл ажиллагааны талаар болоод бусад сэдвээр зочинтойгоо ярилцлаа. Манай өнөөдрийн зочин нэгэн улсын байгууллагын хүн амын сангийн Аз нөхөн талын бүсийн захирал POS мэт байлаа. Ингээд хүрэлцээрсэн танд баярлалаа.
Thank you very much.
За үзэгчдээ анхаарлаа хандуулж хамт байсан та бүхэндээ баярлалаа.